Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. Thank you very much for dialing in. We've got some really great numbers that have great numbers of registrations. So hopefully everyone's going to dial in for what I think is going to be another really good session from the Financial Services Forum. So today we are looking, so much of what we do at the moment is based around in the context of COVID, but it's completely understandable because, as we all know, it's affected all our lives, both personally and from a business point of view. But the focus today really is on what how the impact of COVID has affected our attitudes to personal finance. So really we want to know what do organizations need to do to continue to meet the needs of the customer. So customer needs have changed definitely, obviously through digitization of lots of processes, particularly in banking. But we want to really kind of get in under the bonnet of this and really understand what the consequences of this digital world are in both marketing and for the customer. So it's about marketing, but it's also about the transactional issues and the good and the bad, because there's some people that may not be embracing the kind of digital world that we're all being forced to embrace. So there's lots of questions that we're going to pose. We've got 3 presentations, so we're going to hear from each of our speakers in turn, and then as ever we will invite questions. So please, as we go through, listen carefully and make some notes, and then ask some questions as we go through. And you can do that either on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, or the chat function, or you can even raise your hand and get involved, and we can bring you in live if you want. So there's 3 different ways of asking questions, but we really we'll probably have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions, and it's a really good part of the session. So as I said, we have 3 speakers this morning, so welcome. So to kick us off, we have I'll introduce all 3 now actually, to save fiddling around later on. But to start off, we have Lucy Beldon. Lucy is planning an inclusivity lead for CDS, who we've partnered today with on this session. And Lucy is really looking at all comms and campaigns, making sure all communications and campaigns are inclusive, accessible, and available to all. Then we have Judith Doherty. Judith is from Simple Usability, and Judith sort of charged really with understanding customer needs, which is good, delivering websites and apps and comms that are usable and accessible and inclusive for all. So again, inclusive. And then we have Sandra Moore, and Sandra Moore is CEO of Panintelligence, and Sandra is really tasked with, or tasking herself, I guess, as chief executive on her business, with driving growth through data insights and analytics in both the business and private sectors. So there are speakers. So as I said earlier, thank you very much for joining us, and really looking forward to your presentation. So I'll hand over to you now, Lucy, to kick us off.
Thanks very much, David. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Lucy, and as David said, I'm the Planning and Inclusivity Lead at CDS, a communications agency in Leeds. So on our topic of the behavioural impact of COVID on attitudes to personal finance, I want to first of all touch on why that insight is really essential to your organisation being able to deliver the products, the services, and the messaging that your customers and your potential customers need. So financial institutions store and have access to a vast amount of customer and transactional data, but most are still not utilising that data to drive the benefits and positive outcomes for their customers. So just accumulating and storing lots of data is just not enough. You need a plan of how you're going to turn that data into actionable insights that are going to help to innovate and drive your business forward. There was a 2018 McKinsey report on why data culture matters, and the point they made in that report was that data culture is decision culture. So organisations need to look to adopt a culture that embraces those data-driven decisions. Financial institutions hold higher volumes of highly personalised and specific data than any other sector, and there is massive potential to use that data to drive better decisions based on the precise and specific needs of your customer base. And by using this data effectively, you have the ability to become a genuinely useful and trusted partner. But at the moment, the information that customers get is in the main not that valuable. The data is often too generic and just not that useful. It would be far more valuable if organisations could use the data they hold to boost their own understanding of who their customers are, what their situation is now, and what it is likely to be or could be in the future. Financial services have an opportunity to become a supportive pillar and to change the relationship dynamic. And this can be achieved by developing a forensic insight into who your users are and where they need or might need support to genuinely help people. And I know Judith is going to take you through some research very shortly, so I don't want to dwell too much on statistics, but I just want to touch on a couple of the trends that we're seeing at the moment in relation to COVID and why it's so important for organisations to be really tuned into their customers. So if we think about the last 12 months, we can really start to appreciate just how many people have been touched by at least one of these life events listed. And unfortunately, many of these will actually go hand in hand. If we know that experiencing these events makes people more likely to be at risk, we can predict that more people are going to be pushed into vulnerability by COVID and the recession. And financial institutions have that data and they have the power to be able to step in and even preempt vulnerability, to offer help to those people who need it most. The impending recession makes it more important than ever for organisations to start prioritising their approach to data and providing assistance to their most vulnerable customers. If we think about those events listed, oh, sorry, everyone. if we think about the last 12 months, hang on a second, sorry. Get my slides mixed up here. If we think about the events listed earlier and the additional pressures that have been put on people over the last 12 months, we can start to build a picture of the people behind that data. According to the ONS, 9.9 million people were furloughed in 2020, and a YouGov survey showed that 69% of people who were furloughed are genuinely worried about their financial situation, and 26% are actually worried about losing their jobs. So how can financial services organisations understand and meet the changing needs of their customers? This is potentially a huge number of people that we're talking about here. But it's not all doom and gloom. Lots of sources are actually highlighting the fact that many people are actually financially better off because of COVID. They're not having to travel into the office every day, or they're saving money by not being able to eat out or socialise or go on holiday. And for these customers, they're likely to be looking at ways to maximise their investments and savings, particularly when interest rates are so low. So where can financial institutions flex to ensure they offer maximum value at both ends of the spectrum? Another trend that predates COVID is the move towards a cashless society. And as we know, cash has been declining in the last decade, but this trend has been hugely accelerated in the last 12 months. And while for the majority of people, cashless payment is convenient and welcome, it's absolutely vital to understand that every decision we take has the potential to exclude people. It's really important that we fully appreciate the fact that no two people are alike, and we need to ensure that our rush to innovate and move forward is never at the expense of people who need it the most. We need to be aware of the fact that many vulnerable people are also the people who are most likely to be negatively affected by advances in technology and changes to normal practice. The switch to digital payments is a great example of this. If we know there are already tens of million people using pay-as-you-go services, what impact do we think that the current and impending job crisis is going to have on their financial capabilities? By digging a little deeper into your data, you can reveal so much more about the people behind the statistics and help to understand how you need to change your offering to better suit different audiences. And that brings me on finally to the subject of inclusivity. I'd argue that an inclusive approach needs to be adopted to ensure that no one is left behind, no one is excluded, and no one is marginalised from the financial future. We have to design a world that is accessible and available to everyone, regardless of ability, language, age, or location. And adopting an inclusive approach means putting the needs of your audience at the heart of everything you do. That process has to start with understanding. Every organisation has a unique, diverse audience with varying needs. Understanding their situation, their needs, their expectations and frustrations is a vital first step to ensuring your products, services and messaging are fit for purpose for the audience you serve. And it might seem really obvious, but it's really, really important to remember that your customers are not a static set of traits and data points. They are people with ever-changing and evolving priorities and circumstances that are going to affect their financial situation. What's good for them today might not be right for them tomorrow. So embracing a data-driven culture means keeping your finger on the pulse and being adaptable. The opportunity for financial organisations here is absolutely huge. The next few years have many exciting predictions about where technology will advance and how it's going to change the way we interact with the world. If we have the right data and the right insight, we can drive better decisions and better outcomes for people. Thank you very much. I will hand you over to Judith, who's going to talk to you about the surveys that they run. Thanks.
Judith, are you?
Yeah. There we go. Thanks, Lucy. So just by way of a quick intro, Simple Usability is a behavioural research and UX consultancy. We're based in Leeds, part of the CDS family since October last year. And one of our core sectors is financial services. And these are some of the organisations that we work with on research that's primarily qualitative. So typically what we might be doing is research to inform behavioural personas or research to help develop new products, services, features, functionality, competitive benchmarking. And from February onwards last year, what we noticed was that when we were doing that research, which typically one-to-one research sessions, we were just beginning to see some shifts in behaviour, understandably. Obviously the first one was the fact that we were doing the research remotely rather than sitting with someone in our studios and doing that face-to-face. But there just seemed to be some kind of trends that were emerging and things that we were noticing at large. And we have a database of 13,500 potential participants. And we wanted to take a survey out to that database just to understand what that behaviour looked like on a larger scale and just delve into some of the things that we'd observed within the sessions. So hence the first study which we ran, which really was about the impact of personal finance or the impact of COVID on personal finance and banking in the pandemic. And in terms of our approach, we released a survey to the nationwide panel and we had over 1,000 responses in August of 2020. And then we took a slightly shorter survey out to our database again 6 months later, just to understand if any of those behaviours had changed, how they changed. The survey itself covered 5 key areas. So your finances during the pandemic, how people felt about their financial future, attitudes towards cash payments and cashless society, attitudes to online and mobile banking, and then also exploring open banking and what that meant to the survey respondents. So kicking off with financial security, when asked about how their financial situation had changed since the beginning of the pandemic, over a third of people said they were worse off, and that figure was the same in August and in January. But in the last 6 months, we've got that slight increase, additional 5% of all respondents who said they were better off financially. When asked how they feel about their financial future, nearly half of people feel they are less secure financially, but in those last 6 months, more people feel that they are more secure. So perhaps as the pandemic has played out, people have got to grips with things such as the coronavirus job retention scheme and the various support that was made available initially. that has changed, and this feeling that this is something that we're living with and that we're going to have to get used to, perhaps for longer than we originally thought. When we probed a little further about why people feel less secure about their financial future, understandably, a big chunk of that, 45% of people said they were worried about their job security. And as I step through each of these findings in turn, we've just got some really powerful quotes that came out of the research. And for us, when we think about behavioural change and looking into the data in a little more detail, this really kind of brings in sharp focus what those personal feelings are, and enable us to empathise with the impact of this. So, in addition, 45% of people said they felt less secure because of growing debt. So, this feeling of constantly having to borrow to survive and almost knowing that there is a safety net in place, but of course, so many people do not want to have to get to that point of the safety net of food banks. Extreme debts. So, it could be that a lot of our respondents had debts already, and then actually over the course of the last 12 months, those debts have become more extreme. Perhaps they've not been paying back at the rate that they wanted to, needed to, and having to take on extra debt. And so, this idea of kind of spiraling debt, and one of the sources that Lucy mentioned was step change. And we work with step change ourselves, and as the UK's primary debt charity, we know that the number of people seeking help from organisations like that is just at an unprecedented rate. Having to deal with the impact of reduced income, a concern about the economy. So, everything's gone to pot, everything feels less secure. There's this huge fear factor in place. And then, concern obviously about recession. So it's uncertain when we're going to get back to normal. When are we going to get out of recession? Turning to money management, 69% of the respondents have changed the way that they manage their money. And this is up 11 percentage points from 6 months ago. So practically what that looks like, 38% of people have saved more money during lockdown. 33% of people have moved money during lockdown. So aware that interest rates have decreased, they've been moving savings to a different bank. Also an apprehension around investment because of this uncertainty about long term. 30% of people have used more credit or bank overdraft facility during lockdown. And again, with a nod back to what Lucy said, for some people, we have seen this situation where their finances have worsened, but equally for others, because there's been reduced expenditure, 27% of people said they paid off some debt during lockdown. So financial advice, we asked people, have you looked for financial advice since the beginning of the pandemic? And 19%, 1 in 5 people, said they had. So we then probed further around the sources that they'd used to look for that financial advice. So 48%, sorry, this is essentially what kind of financial advice that they had looked for. So 48% were looking for comparisons between different financial products. 38% were looking for benefits entitlement, 31% looking for mortgages, 29% looking for debt advice. So that figure is down by 4 percentage points from 6 months ago. So perhaps a feeling that, initially people may have looked for that advice, received that advice, feel that they have a better fix on what's going on with their personal finances. And then we asked where people had turned to. So what was their go-to source? MoneySavingExpert.com was the top choice, selected by 61% of people, and that was up by 7 percentage points from 6 months ago. That was followed by friends and family, by a Google search, and then by seeking the support of a financial advisor. So when we looked at someone's current bank, their bank website, their bank app, that was 22.85%. So that was the next source in terms of the ones that people scored as their go-to sources. But still, that is significantly down when you compare it with something like Money Saving Expert that obviously has that impartiality or perceived impartiality. And then when we asked about branches, people just 15% had gone to their bank branch to seek guidance. So paying with cash, over half, 54% of people said they're unlikely to use cash. And this is right now. So this isn't necessarily for the long term, but this is unlikely to use cash at the moment. And when we compare that with 6 months ago, there's been little change in the number of people using cash to pay for goods or services. And 78% of people do not think we should have a cashless society. And this figure has actually gone up by 8 percentage points from 6 months ago. And when we asked for a little bit more information around that, why did people believe that? People referred to the older generation who perhaps are more cash dependent. They also talked about younger generations as well. So this idea that giving a child a deposit in an account for a birthday rather than, £5, £10 a gift from grandparents, that was another reason why they didn't want a cashless society. There was also concern around vulnerable people, perhaps who don't necessarily have the access to digital to be able to, manage their accounts online, but also, perhaps just this concern that not everyone has a bank account. Not everyone is able to use that contactless credit card or contactless debit card. There's still, as I'm sure you're aware, a huge swathe of the population that don't have access to a bank account and use that to operate their finances. Equally, it's this sense that someone's sense of preference, someone's choice has been taken away from them, and we should respect that. People's experiences using cash during lockdown. So someone being frowned upon by some people. I've used it twice, once because the cash machine's out of order. Second was to use some birthday money, but that was received negatively. So looking at online and mobile banking, 66% are visiting their bank branch less often since the beginning of the pandemic. And people volunteered the alternatives that they found as ways of depositing cash, checks, or paying bills without visiting their branch. And naturally there we see online methods coming to the fore, but also just using friends and family, perhaps going to post offices or local shops as an alternative. 82% of people said they had no doubts or concerns about applying for financial products without visiting a branch. So reasons for that: comfortable, confident with online. Online's quick and easy, it's convenient, it's efficient. They've had a good previous banking app experience when applying for products. That information is easily accessible. And then in terms of the frequency of online and mobile banking, 38% have used online or mobile banking more often since lockdown. And we probed a little further about which of the following the respondents felt comfortable doing online. And topping that, unsurprisingly, checking statements and balances, 94%. And then you see that scale going down of things that perhaps people feel less confident doing. So applying for new products, 57% were less confident doing that. Most pleasing thing about online and mobile banking. So starting with the positives, it's easy. It's easy to log into, know exactly what you have to spend. It makes managing money easier to keep track of. Instant access. Ease of access, it's at your fingertips. If you want to know your balance or carry out a transaction, it's like having a personal banker in your pocket. It's quick, it's convenient. And then moving on to the most frustrating things. So our survey respondents kind of gave a number of answers and they congregated around these areas. So the first thing, encouragingly, was that someone had no frustrations, an amazing level of confidence that this respondent had in their bank's app and in online banking and being really confident that it's the most secure of UK banks. So, for someone to wholeheartedly say, I have no frustrations at all, that's a very positive thing. But then we get into kind of specific features or functionality. So an inability to pay or deposit checks or cash. The fact that additional equipment is needed, for example, a card reader, issues with downloading statements, delayed transactions, inability to access certain information, and also the inability to close accounts. Customer service, so this feeling that perhaps you're in a situation where all the answers should be delivered digitally. So if you get to a point at which you need some help, the feeling that that help is not always as easily accessible, and the customer service route certainly isn't as strong. Security, so forgetting passwords, extreme safety measures, which then compromise usability, and that's a really fine balance. Making something secure, but at the same time respecting usability and making it easy at the same time, and kind of straddling the two. Frustrations around logging in, timing out, safety and trust. Then we've got website or app issues. So we're looking at maintenance, things crashing, the navigation. Interesting point here, and this was from a respondent who was slightly younger, finding websites challenging to navigate, and this feeling that people my age should find it easy, but a lot of people have said the same. So again, from a taxonomy and usability point of view, perhaps some apps, some websites aren't quite as usable as they could be or should be. Then we come on to connectivity. So issues with signal and 4G, 3G. So open banking, this was really interesting for us because we know a number of our clients are obviously including this within product development. So the first question was, do you understand what open banking is? 80% said off the bat, 80% of people said no, they didn't understand what open banking is. 20% of people said yes, they do understand what it is. But when we actually asked that 20% what their understanding was, 25% gave the wrong description, 7% were unable to give a description. So once we've kind of established what it was and what it meant, we asked people for their perceived advantages of it. So all accounts in one place, easy access to all accounts, the ability to enhance budgeting and managing money, and also an improved understanding of overall finances. Disadvantages of open banking. A lot of risks, perceived risks around fraud, hackers, security, data sharing, privacy, and also for people with debts. Did this mean that perhaps they were being put in a more difficult position because a lot of that information would be openly accessible? So what now? From the research that we've done, as I said, for our clients in qualitative sessions and from the surveys, we see a huge opportunity to build trust. I think perhaps it's unrealistic to expect that, as I said, perceived impartiality of something like Money Saving Expert, that a bank could ever kind of strive for that level of trust and to become that go-to source. But the fact that, that was really quite low down the go-to sources, there's a huge opportunity there. How can we better support customers? How can we respect channel choice? We talk a lot about, channel shift and encouraging shift towards digital, but doing that in a way that is sympathetic to everyone from an inclusivity point of view. And that we also have a seamless movement from different sources to another. So it could be that, someone chooses to start a particular journey on their app, but how can that seamlessly move through to something that's a bit more conversational and they feel as if that customer service channel is really, really strong and it's there for them. Individual behaviours. So as marketeers, we like to segment, we like to be able to just make things more manageable once we've got kind of solid segmentation models or personas that we can use to inform product and service development. And I think, personas as a side point, the personas that may have existed before February last year are just going to be changed in all sorts of ways. So, from a persona point of view, that's going to need to be ripped up. We're going to need to review that. But actually, it's about looking beyond the broad trends and having those one-to-one conversations and understanding what that individual wants, what their optimum experience is. And of course, there are huge tools, numbers of tools out there that allow for that deep personalization. And I think that ability to feel that you are being engaged as an individual, being listened to, your channel choices are being respected, that will just become ever more important. And then the final point, and again with a nod back to Lucy, inclusivity and accessibility. We do a lot of work around accessibility and also supporting people who have assisted digital needs and people who have lower levels of digital confidence. So making sure that no one is left behind and that experiences meet the needs of all customers. Thanks very much. I'll hand over to Zandra.
Well, thank you very much, Judith. That was fantastic. I'll just share my screen, so bear with me, everybody. And you should be able to see this shortly. Okay, I'm just going to swap this over. Hopefully you're all able to see my screen now. Judith, if you put your thumbs up, I can see you, and I know we've got it. Fantastic. Okay. Well, look, it's a fantastic subject, this, and data for me is at the heart of everything we do at Panintelligence. So my name's Sandra Moore. I'm CEO of a technology business called Panintelligence CDS. Work with us to deliver those solutions into their customers. And I want to tell you a little bit about how we enable your organisations to make sure that customers are not just data points, and that you have better visibility of changing behaviours and attitudes so that you can take decisions and adapt quickly. I really like something that Lucy said, which is about putting the finger on the pulse at a time when things are changing so quickly. So how do we help you to adapt quickly so that we're not leaving those vulnerable groups and ensuring we're including everyone? So like I said, we're a data specialist. We're a technology company. We were born out of fintech here in the UK. We were built originally for the banking and financial services industry, and we have a large number of customers in that space. The technology that we have does three things. I'll talk about that shortly, but essentially it's a tool and technology that doesn't need you to be a technologist or an expert in data science. It really helps to give sort of marketeers an advantage in being able to keep their finger on that pulse. And your challenge is increasing around data. Increasingly, the technologies and the tools that you use for communicating those multiple channels that Judith talked about are digitally driven. Data is everywhere, often in lots of different places, in a variety of perhaps cloud tools, internal, external data storage. It's quite difficult, therefore, to get that kind of real-time view of what's happening with customers. And with these changing times and more rapidly changing behaviours, never has it been more difficult, quite frankly, for marketeers to get their hands on that real-time insight. But at the heart of those technologies and tools that you're using for sort of gathering that insight is essentially it's the data, and getting to that data to help you to understand and predict customer attitudes and behaviours is what we really focus on helping you to do. Now, there are four core sort of stages to that data insight journey that you will probably be very familiar with. So retrospective hindsight reporting. In some ways, what Judith presented today is point in time litmus test of where customers' behaviours and attitudes are. So what's happened? The next area is why is that happening? What are the cause of these changes driving behaviours? And whilst we're talking about COVID today, there's also those sub-layers of so what beyond the cause of COVID, what is driving those changes in attitudes and behaviours? So the diagnostic why is that causing these patterns? We then look at, well, can we predict the outcomes that may happen as a result of these changing patterns? And even better, can we prescribe or change interventions, change channels, change the way in which we offer products, services, or communicate with our customers to achieve better outcomes for them and the organisation. So as we move from that left to right, it becomes more complicated. And for many, just getting to the basics of what's happening now is actually first base. And it's important that we acknowledge that sometimes it's as simple as just tell me how people are behaving now and how they're feeling and how we need to respond to that. So that kind of hindsight, insight and foresight, those are the three things that our technology enables companies to do. There's a really important reason why this is a technology that people don't need to be a data scientist to use, because actually it's you, the business experts, that understand the objectives. You understand where those data sets are and how confident you are in that data that you are receiving. Often you're making decisions based on gut feelings, and you want some data to validate perhaps a sense of actually we need to be changing the channel or the way in which we approach a particular group of customers. But actually you're also better served to understand, well, if we make that change, what the impact of that change might be. So the causation of any kind of changes of the way in which you work with those customers in the product, services or channels. So really, it's the domain experts, it's the people in the business operations that understand what matters and why it matters, but also have the greatest ability to affect change quickly with that information. So they're the people that are best placed to be able to use technology to understand what's going on in real time. But more often than not in your organisations, there are teams of data scientists, maybe sat in IT operations, that are the ones that have the skills, the people, the technology to be able to build or bring those data sets together. They're often using quite technically sophisticated tools. They have programming skills. They have a sort of more data science focus on understanding how to build perhaps a predictive model or understand correlation between different data sets. And therefore it feels a long way away from the operations which can affect or drive change quickly. And sometimes the feedback from those teams of getting that data insight is too slow to respond quick enough to those rapidly changing attitudes and behaviours that we're finding as a result of COVID. So how do we change that? So this is about bridging that gap between those that have the tools, the skills, and the resources, and the people that have the domain knowledge and the ability to affect change. And in order to help the domain experts, the marketeers, for example, trust that the information and the insight they're getting is something they want to take action on, is to make it understandable, explainable. That is the way you trust this information that you are receiving and therefore are confident enough to act on it. I'm going to use a few really simple examples just to explain or bring that to life. Cyclops Hawkeye is a simple tennis example. Previously, somebody at the side would be looking at whether or not the ball was in or out, and it would be based on somebody's visual memory of what they saw. Now we have the technology that enables that to be digitally, that decision to be made. But we don't just make that digital decision in a black box. We help the whole crowd to be engaged in that decision. They can see a visual representation of exactly what happened in that moment. And therefore, everybody's bought into understanding, and therefore they're confident that that was the right decision. Maybe a little bit more, less popular is VAR. But again, if you don't show, in this case, the red line as to how close that decision was, people perhaps don't trust the decision that was made by the VAR. They can't see it. So it's incredibly important that if we're using technology to help us make decisions, to change the way in which we provide products, services, or information to people, that we understand how that decision was made, how the data is being used to do that. So communicating clearly, making sure it's visible, engaging everybody in that decision. But it's not always as easy as trusting something like a technology. I know I don't own a Tesla. I know somebody who does, but I'm not sure I'd be ready to take my hands off the wheel on a motorway just yet. But the point is, Tesla and the screen on Tesla tells you all the time. It shows you how the model is working out where you are on the road, how it would automatically rectify that decision. And it is about the human and technology working together to inform the human on whether or not they can trust that this model or this technology is going to help them to make a decision better. So it's got to involve a person. It can never be without a person looking at that and challenging that model or that data set. So this is about working with you to help you sort of make those decisions in real time. Let me give you a sort of finance example. So we're familiar with how sort of models and finance work. This is a marketing fees underwriting where we're looking at a lending environment. And we're in people are feeling less financially secure. We are likely to get a higher response rate, perhaps when we're offering products to the market in lending. And a high response rate doesn't necessarily mean that these are all the people that the underwriters would necessarily approve as having a credit score worthy of us being able to lend to them. And those models that have existed for a long time is about combining, the best of high response rates with the people that we think are most likely to pay. That's how a lot of these scorecards and models work. We're combining data from different information about historical information to do with who has and hasn't paid, but also to do with market data. And whilst that works in principle, as behaviours and attitudes change, it's important these models are constantly adapting and learning, getting the best of both worlds, but at the same time not excluding people as a result of changes in environments and circumstances. Here's an example that I think is useful to illustrate that. So we went into a bank and they said, well, that's great, we've got this combination, but the people with a high credit score are defaulting and we want to know who those groups are. So they put our team on the spot, and straight away one of the team said, look, we're looking for something that's is highly correlated. We're looking for something that has a split. So what I mean by that is we want something that you can apply to the whole population. So not people on this specific road are likely to not repay a loan, but actually people that perhaps live in a cul-de-sac. So we can apply that to a larger proportion of the population. A silly example, but hopefully it illustrates. We're looking for correlations that can be applied to a large group of the population. And as they were talking about it, they were looking at a book of 10,000 and out popped a group of 90. And this group of 90 straight away, they said, oh, that's a very small data set, it's probably not relevant. But yet everybody in the room, the domain experts, the board of this financial institution said stop and started talking about widowers. When they looked down the data points, nothing in the data said that this was a widower. These were women over the age of 50. They'd lived at their address for 10 plus years. They had a very low risk, high credit score, and they were defaulting. And the ones that were defaulting were recently widowed. In fact, a very high proportion of it, they only found that out once they investigated and created that list. And straight away, they went from seeing that data set to imagining the collections team upstairs, sending letters out, chasing people that were suddenly in a position where perhaps they didn't have a great deal of control over their finances, that often the men in these homes were the ones that were controlling the finances, and therefore they were simply getting these letters, putting them in the drawer and saying, I can't deal with that right now. They weren't able to process, understand, or even perhaps understood what was being sent to them. So all they wanted was that list, and they wanted to take that list up to the collections team, stop the letters going out, and pass it over a customer services team for them to give them a call, because these were likely to be customers for life treated appropriately. Now, it's a very simplistic example, but the point here is that data can help you to identify those groups that you want to treat differently very, very quickly. And you can then apply that as new data is coming in and create as many different scorecards in a way to those changing groups. So it's not about whether or not something is statistically significant or even whether it's always highly correlated. It's whether it's something that you can or should do something about, even if it's a small group, because ultimately the impact and the change to the outcomes for that group and your ability to create, in this case, a customer for life, was powerful and worth enough to that organisation to justify taking that intervention. But you need the data to tell that story in order for that to come to life. And it's the domain experts that are best placed to understand whether or not that is something that they should or could be doing something about. So a data scientist is more likely to look for significance. A domain expert is more likely to look for impact. And that's why it's so important that the tool is in the hands, or the technology is in the hands of the people that understand that. So that's really where technology like ours comes into play. This is about giving people at the front line, people that are making the decisions about how they adapt to changing customer behaviours, with the ability to quickly build and see exactly what's happening in their data. So what's happening and why it's happening in real time. That you can not just report on what's happening and what's changing, but understand the why it's changing, and even better, predict the outcomes and therefore take different interventions. And the point is, this is something that can be empowered, or you can be empowered to do. This is something that is a technology that your teams can pick up and connect to all the variety of data sets that you have. And ultimately, this is something that you can share beyond your teams. Back to VAR or Hawkeye, in order to get everyone to trust that we are close enough to the truth to be able to take appropriate action, make the changes, and offer better products and services to include or ensure we don't exclude groups, is to be able to give that information to more people so that they understand. And it's so important that the way it's visualized and the way it's shared is easy to understand and explainable by anybody. So it's not just about locking this again into a particular team or department and making it one part of the organization's problem. It's enabling everybody in the organization to get comfortable that that decision is the right decision that's being made. So this is really about empowering you. It's helping you to really unlock that data and tune into the real time. And as Lucy said right at the start, to look back, give you the ability to have your finger on the pulse. Ensure that the decisions around products, services, and channels are constantly adapting to the changing needs of your customer. So that was everything I was going to cover today. I think we're moving to a Q&A. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back over to David.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Sandra, and Judith and Lucy. So very good. So we have got time for questions. So please, if you have any, now is your chance to get them in. So lots of things to think about there. And Zandra, I might just come to you first. I mean, from what you're all talking about, really, from different perspectives, but it's all, which is really what I really like about this, is it is actually about the customer. So it's actually, you know, what can businesses do for the customer, and it's that deep insight that really feeds into all the different areas that you're talking about. But Zandra, in your experience, this is an area that we've looked at a few times, but businesses are of different size and different complexity and different legacy systems. You know, so I've got two questions. The first one is, who is it that is really driving change? Is it the domain experts in marketing, or is it the people that control the IT budgets? You know, IT marketers are mainly people about what do we want to do, and IT is about what we can do. But and there's always a bit of a tension there, isn't there, between marketing and IT or finance. So it's like, who's controlling this? And secondly, it must be really just, if you can share some of your experiences with different scale or size of businesses, because some businesses with legacy systems, hugely complex product systems, you know, some businesses of a certain size will find this much more difficult than others.
Yeah, and two brilliant questions, and not always straightforward to answer. And, you know, and the truth is, every organisation at a different size and scale has different complexities and different challenges. I think, you know, we've worked, you know, Lloyd's loan book we've been working with that for many years, through to a Start Line or a Motor Nova and Motor Finance. And we have a whole different range of financial services organisations. So, you know, we do have a real mix of customers that work across all sorts of different types of financial products. And where we have, as the larger institutions, if we take Lloyd's Banking, you're absolutely right that, you know, we're dealing with an institution where it is incredibly segregated as to where both the data and the decisions around technologies versus the application of that technology to drive change. So it's an education process invariably, where we are enabling a stakeholder leader of this agenda, whatever that might be. And sometimes you've got a chief data officer that you're working with that's trying to bring a whole range of cross-organisational stakeholder groups together to actually look at how do we bring about change quickly. And for me, it would be, if you're in one of those larger organisations, is participating in that conversation, is putting yourself forward as being part of a forum or a group that really just sees yourself as having absolutely the right to be at that table and drive those conversations, because you are the architects that can affect real change rapidly once you have that insight. So, try and get a seat at that table, or certainly assert that you should have a seat at that table in those larger organisations would be my first point. My second point in the smaller organisations is usually you've got somebody who is a bit of an innovation leader, and it can often be sat in the technology teams of those organisations. But again, look for the people that are there to bring about change, and they may not necessarily always be the tech leader, but it tends to sit more in the technology teams in the smaller organisations, and you can be an influencer of saying, look, can we be a pilot for this in our team? Can we take the ownership of running that project? And actually, all you need from those technology leaders is access to the data, which is a connection. That's it. Everything else you'll be able to do for yourself. So you're not needing a whole load of resources. And that's what CDS are for, quite frankly. They will be able to hold your hand and support you through that journey of being able to do that as a pilot within your organisation. So it's difficult and complex, and I wish there was a straightforward answer, but CDS are here to help you navigate, no matter what size organisation you are, as to the best way to perhaps pilot or start that project. And we absolutely will support you in being able to have some of those internal stakeholder conversations and influence that, so that you can be not just a domain expert, you can also be somebody who's better informed on this conversation, so you can have it internally. I'll stop talking there, but hopefully that answers it, David.
Yes, thank you. No, it is. It's also massively complex because of the breadth and depth of different providers that are out there. There seems to be those organogram charts with thousands of different product or solutions that are out there. I think it's really confusing current marketplace for marketeers. But thank you for that. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. Judith, this question is: Did your research go into any depth around using a bank's mobile app more during the pandemic over using online banking? And are customers aware of all the functionality now available, i.e. photo of a check deposit?
Yep, thanks, Katie. I was just in the midst of typing a response. Yeah, we looked at mobile versus online, and I can share those figures with you afterwards. And what we found was that it was very it was a real patchwork of people who were absolutely confident and aware of the full feature set of their app or online banking, and then others for whom they just didn't have that same level of awareness. And so I think we had a quote there which was someone saying that they knew that they could scan the check on their app, but their sister was using, I think, TSB, and that wasn't a feature that was available. So it was a little bit of a patchwork. Some people with absolute confidence and knowledge of what their app could do, and others for whom perhaps they were just checking it for balances and they weren't fully aware of all features. But if I can get back to you on that figure of kind of preference of app over online banking. Okay,
thank you. Actually, Lucy, I've got a question for you. So it was around sort of financial vulnerability, which is your area of specialism. In your experience, are you seeing businesses taking more responsibility for that, or is this drive and absolutely, quite rightly, business and the financial service sector should be looking after vulnerable customers? But has that been driven more by the regulator? Are businesses reacting, or are they driving this?
I think that's certainly a big part of it. Yeah, I mean, over the last few years, the FCA has increasingly placed a lot more emphasis on the responsibility of organisations to kind of not only consider that, but really, really prioritise that. So I think unfortunately, as tends to be the case with things like this, the stick is a bit more appealing than the carrot, because at the end of the day, the idea of penalties and kind of incurring the wrath of a regulator is kind of more of a persuasive argument, specifically to the people at top as well. I think what we see with the conversations we have with kind of clients and potential clients is that at a certain level, people are really bought in, but the problem that people seem to have is really selling that in right at the top. So making the people right at the top really understand that having that focus on your customers and really, really kind of understanding them and delivering like we said, the products, the services, the channels, whatever it is, but delivering what they need in the way that they need it is absolutely vital. And I think that's not only for customers as well, but we're seeing that increasingly in terms of internal communications as well, and your internal workforces and how you be an inclusive employer. And I think it's beginning to take kind of root now, and we're really starting to see it's shifting up that priority chain. But I think the difficulty is still that really selling right at the top level. So it's a challenge we see a lot.
Just to follow up on that, David,
yeah.
As Lucy said, it's kind of the carrot and the stick. And, I think there's that moral responsibility to serve the needs of all customers. But typically what we find is that some of our customers then point to the spending power of, I think it's termed the purple pound, and essentially the number of people who have some form of disability in the UK. And that spending that, you're putting a cap on it, you're limiting the number of people that can engage with your product or service by not making it fully usable, inclusive and accessible. So, I think there's a couple of sticks from kind of, the regulator through to the value of the purple pound. And then obviously, as Lucy said, that kind of more, you should just be doing this because we should all be treated in this way, with respect and with a view of inclusivity.
And do you think there's the pandemic has thrown this kind of more starkly into relief, that people can't get down to their bank branch, they can't pay the check-in, and they're being forced to use mobile banking. So those kind of issues are being forced on people. So therefore there's an obligation on the business providers in order to provide some of those solutions for them. So do you think there's a sort of opportunity there that for businesses, particularly around, you mentioned trust in your presentation, Judith, and trust is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because we all trust our bank not to go bust, but we don't necessarily trust our bank to do what's in our best interest. But what you're talking about, I think, is about through data and understanding, and is really starting to act much more with a purpose that is delivering value or what people need at the right time in the right place. But that's kind of been supercharged by the pandemic.
Yeah, and particularly around branch, we had a conversation with one of our clients last week, and they were talking about research they've done to explore, it's easy to kind of typify it as an older generation, but for a lot of people, going to the branch is more than just depositing a check or getting some money out. It's a social interaction. Yeah. And so, that has been limited, and, they want to serve those customers in the way they best can, and, kind of being a digital buddy and encouraging them through that branch interaction to perhaps try digital or mobile. What they believe is that there will be a certain number of people who have had the confidence to try it, have been supported with it, will stay with it. But that doesn't necessarily address that more social reason for visiting a branch. And, the fact that they know the people there, they've got that connection with them. And, how you do that in the digital space is a very interesting question. And that led to a conversation around conversational user interfaces and, enabling chat. And when is chat bots and when is it a real person, and the real importance of being very candid about what that chat experience is, because there's nothing worse than someone thinking they're speaking with a real person, and then a couple of ways further down the conversational UI thread, realizing that they're speaking with a bot, they feel duped. So conversational UIs, I think, that's a huge area for growth, and to be able to kind of build trust and relationship in the form of a conversation. But for a lot of people, nothing will replace that branch experience.
Yeah, great. Well, look, sadly, we're just about out of time. So I was going to ask you if anyone's got any final comments before we wrap up. So we're just about up at our hour mark. Has anyone got any final comments that we want to leave the audience with? Sandra, any final thoughts to share?
It just feels like we've got a real thread here, which is about just being in tune and having the finger on the pulse at the moment, and everybody's feeling that. And I think we should all be sort of asking ourselves how we can do that and getting support where we can, so that we can deal with some of these challenges around inclusivity and I think it's, you know, you've got to be tuned in. How do you tune in would be my sense, asking yourself that question.
Okay, great.
I would just add to that, you know, we talk about user centricity, customer centricity, and good customer experience, and it's being mindful that you know, that really is the starting point for any successful product or service. It's understanding what the needs of your users, your customers are, and responding to those. And you know, generally we find there are the kind of the business objectives, and then ultimately, you know, what you're trying to do is reconcile those business objectives with meeting the needs of those customers. If you don't get that right, the business objectives are going to be that much harder to achieve, because you don't necessarily understand the needs of your market. So, you know, for us, you know, of course, we're going to say that we're a behavioural research agency, but really understanding what your customers want and need from you and responding to that.
Yeah. I think that is a real theme, actually, Judith, that's come through a lot. We've done, you know, as I said at the beginning, quite a lot of sessions about the customer, changing customer behaviours in the context of the pandemic. So I think there's definitely a movement towards much deeper understanding of what's going on within the customers and trying to match those customer needs. So so yeah, it's really interesting. So that was a great session. So sorry, Lucy, I don't know if you had anything final to say, but we better wrap it up. But
That's okay. Yeah.
you're done. Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much. This session has been recorded, so you can come back and look at the slides again later. I think there was a lot of detail in those slides, so that'll be up on the forum website later on today, tomorrow. And I'm sure you all, CDS and Panintelligence, will be open to receiving any reach out. So we'll happy to facilitate that if you want to follow up with our individual speakers. But that's it for now. So thank you everyone for dialing in. Thank you for the questions, and a really good start today. Very thought-provoking and very much of the moment. So thank you to Zandra, thank you Lucy, and thank you Judith for your great contributions today. And thank you everyone for dialing in. Lots up on the forum website, so have a look at events going forward through the next February and into March, and indeed into April, which we're now putting up. So lots going on as ever. So that's it from us for today. So thank you very much and goodbye.